On this Wednesday night from Quebec City, the second stop of the Pope's pilgrimage of penance, the province's first visit from a pontiff in 4 decades.
Asking forgiveness, that's a big deal.
And how Quebecers are losing their religion.
There's no other place in the continent that is less practicing.
Plus the meaning behind this woman's emotional message to the Pope. Hockey Canada's hush money, the staggering amount of cash used to settle decades of sexual misconduct claims, and first-degree murder. Police arrest 2 people accused of killing the man acquitted of the Air India bombings.
Global National with Donna Friesen. Reporting tonight from Quebec City, Jeff Semple.
Pope Francis arriving here to the Plains of Abraham in Quebec City this evening, waving to hundreds of people who had gathered here, some since very early this morning. The Pope arrived here from Edmonton for the next leg of what he calls his pilgrimage of penance in Canada. Good evening, and thank you for joining us. We are coming to you tonight from the Plains of Abraham here in Quebec City's Battlefields Park, an historic site hosting a historic visit from the Pontiff. Hundreds of people had gathered here to catch a glimpse of the Holy Father, and despite the painful purpose of his visit, it was really a celebratory atmosphere here, and that continues tonight. In just a few short hours, the Pope met with the Prime Minister, the Governor General, and residential school survivors. And he once again apologized, begging for forgiveness for the Catholic Church's role in Canada's residential school system.
I express my deep shame and sorrow, and together with the bishops of this country, I renew my request for forgiveness for the wrong done by so many Christians to the Indigenous peoples.
Por todo esto, pido perdón.
I beg forgiveness.
There's no doubt that you had an enormous impact. Survivors and their descendants need to be at the center of everything we do going forward.
The Prime Minister there also speaking today, his first public statements since the Pope's trip began. They both spoke inside the Citadel de Quebec. That's an active military installation and also the second official residence of the Governor-General of Canada. Now, this marks Pope Francis's first stop outside of Alberta and into a province that has deep Roman Catholic roots. Our Mike Armstrong is following the Pope on this leg of his Canadian tour. So, Mike, the Pope touched down at around 3 o'clock local time this afternoon. How did events unfold from your vantage point?
Well, not without a couple of hiccups. The Pope's plane arrived on time, but another plane carrying Indigenous leaders and members of the organizing committee had trouble getting out of Alberta, actually, so the day's schedule had to be pushed back an hour, basically, before it even started. People here in the Plains of Abraham watched the arrival and events on a big screen, but they did get to see the Pope in person when he made a last event of the day, a trip in the Pope-mobile past the crowd here. They're also going to be showing, by the way, the Mass tomorrow that the Pope will be celebrating. They're going to show it on the big screen here. It's happening outside town, but this will sort of be overflow for people who can't make it to Sainte-Anne-de-Beaupré. Jeff?
Right, and speaking of overflow, I didn't have a chance to do a head count, but it looked like maybe a couple thousand people in that crowd here today, but certainly nothing compared to the hundreds of thousands we saw here during the last papal visit 38 years ago. So what's the relationship these days like between Quebecers and the Catholic Church?
Yeah, well, if you go back 60 years, this was the most religious province in Canada. It's actually the least religious province now, even if it doesn't always feel that way.
If you were dropped out of the sky into Quebec, not knowing much about it, you'd likely, maybe undoubtedly, assume it's deeply religious. There are streets and towns named after saints in every direction, and if you're in a place with a mountain, including Montreal, there's a good chance there's a cross looking down. Well, as they say, appearances can be deceiving.
There's no other place in the continent that is less practicing than is Quebec.
This is a place where the Catholic Church was once powerful and popular. Back in the 1950s, about 90% of Catholics attended church every week. In 1984, when Pope John Paul visited the province, church attendance was still around 50%. That number kept dropping. Today it's about 4%. Where the Catholic Church once administered schools, ran hospitals, and oversaw social welfare programs, starting in the 1960s, Quebec became more and more secular.
I think it was driven by politics, largely the idea that the modernization of the province actually required to push the church aside.
Now, there is a paradox in modern Quebec. People may not attend church, but according to Statistics Canada, it has the highest rate of people who declare a religious affiliation.
The vast majority of at least Francophones were, baptized. They became Catholic. But it doesn't mean that today they still believe in the church, but they might still identify as Catholic as part of their, cultural identity.
Those religious symbols that are everywhere in Quebec are for many not a part of their religion as much as their heritage. There have been calls to remove the cross in Montreal in the name of secularism, but there are also voices that want to protect it in the name of history.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
That said, Quebec's secularism push has led to its controversial Bill 21. It bans some public sector employees from wearing religious clothing like hijabs and kippas or a visible cross around someone's neck. But something like the cross over Montreal is different.
A lot of the crosses that you see here are considered closer to something secular, whereas non-Christian religious symbols are certainly described as religious and significantly religious and even threatening on some level.
There's a new term that's been coined to sort of describe how Quebec straddles being both religious and secular, and it's catho-laïcité, Catholic secularism, two terms that normally don't really go together. Jeff?
Catholic secularism. All right, Mike Armstrong, who's with us here in Quebec City. Thanks, Mike. And among those also in attendance here, a group of residential school survivors, along with their friends and families, who walked 275 kilometers to be here. They began their journey some 7 days ago from the Innu community of Mastuiash. Now that's a symbolic starting point. Mastuiash is where Quebec's last residential school closed in 1991. I met one member of the march whose mother attended that school and who later died of alcoholism. And he says this walk itself is a symbolic healing journey.
I think that's a very symbolic of the path that Indigenous people in Canada have to take. A long walk of a journey of healing. And we have to start from somewhere. You have to do the first step. Even if it's not perfect, the second step may be better, the third step going to be better. And when you're going to arrive to the 1,000 steps, you're going to be excellent walker.
And coming up a little later in the newscast, we'll explore the push to preserve Indigenous languages. I'll speak with one group of Inuit on how they're working to bring Inuktitut into the digital age. And a reminder that if you or someone you know who is a residential school survivor are looking for help, you can call that Residential School Survivors and Family Crisis Line anytime. It's 1-800-721-0066. To other news now, and damning new details about Hockey Canada's handling of sexual assault allegations. The governing body paid out more than $7 million in 9 sex abuse settlements dating back to the 1980s. As Shallima Maharaj reports, MPs now want to know why the board hasn't been more transparent.
Demands for a changing of the guard front and center as Hockey Canada's CFO Brian Cairo admitted to settlement payments from its National Equity Fund.
9 settlement payments have been made, totaling $7.6 million.
On top of that, another 12 sexual misconduct settlements in the amount of $1.3 million through insurance.
The board of directors authorized the maximum amount of the settlement.
You've now stated that the board authorized the maximum amount. Where is that minuted in a board of directors meeting?
As I stated earlier, in-camera sessions within the board for the board of directors are not minuted.
There was no mincing words. Former NHLer and advocate for victims Sheldon Kennedy reiterating his urgent call for Hockey Canada CEO Scott Smith to step down.
It's kind of like, oh, we got caught, we better do this because the minister tells us to do this and our sponsors pulled out.
I strongly believe there needs to be new leadership within Hockey Canada. Will you do that? Will you step down for new leadership to take over?
That I'm prepared to take on this responsibility for change within our game. I believe I've got the experience to do it Should our board or the governance review that we've outlined in our action plan suggest that I'm not the person, then I'm prepared to prepared to accept that.
Hockey's been able to maintain its operations with practices that are not congruent with the changes we've seen in broader society. And that's the change that needs to take place.
The scandal surrounding Hockey Canada's handling of alleged sexual assaults has conjured a larger conversation about Canada's once beloved national pastime.
This is an entire cultural change that needs to happen. It needs to happen from top to bottom in the organization, and putting out an action plan is not going to be enough.
Shallima Maharaj, Global News, Ottawa.
The Canadian government says there are now 745 confirmed cases of monkeypox in this country, and it expects that number to climb.
The Public Health Agency of Canada recommends practicing safer sex. Having fewer sexual partners, particularly anonymous partners, even when they don't have symptoms, can also reduce your risk of getting infected.
Canada's Public Health Agency says it has deployed more than 70,000 doses of a vaccine to provinces and territories. Globally, 78 countries have reported more than 18,000 cases of the disease. And last weekend, the World Health Organization declared monkeypox a global health emergency. New developments in a murder investigation. Coming up, who's been charged with killing the man acquitted of the Air India bombings? We are coming to you from the Plains of Abraham in Quebec City, the national traditional unceded territory of the Huron-Wendat people, and we'll be right back. Welcome back to Quebec City. We'll have more on the Pope's Canadian visit in just a moment, but we turn now to a developing story out of British Columbia. Two men there are facing charges tonight in the murder of Rapudaman Singh Malik. The 75-year-old was gunned down outside his business earlier this month in Surrey, BC, just east of Vancouver. Malik himself was acquitted of murder charges in the 1985 Air India bombings. As Kamal Karamali explains, this isn't the accused's first run-in with the law.
Police announcing the arrest of two males in their 20s nearly 2 weeks after Rapudaman Singh Malik was gunned down in a neighborhood in Surrey, BC. 21-year-old Tanner Fox and 23-year-old Jose Lopez have been charged with first-degree murder, arrested yesterday at their homes just outside Vancouver, but both appear to have a long history of violent crime. Court records show a man with the same name as Fox was charged after a 2019 stabbing in Abbotsford and an aggravated assault last fall. A man with the same name as Lopez shows a longer rap sheet, charged last summer with 9 criminal counts, including possession of a firearm. The victim, Malik, a controversial business figure in Surrey, most notably known for being charged in the 1985 Air India bombing that killed 331 passengers, most of them from Vancouver and Toronto. He and another suspected co-conspirator were acquitted in 2005. The 75-year-old was shot multiple times in a Surrey neighborhood on July 14th. Investigators releasing a video of a suspect vehicle that was found burned out hours after the fatal shooting. Police say the public was able to ID that suspect vehicle that led to the arrests, but giving limited details during a press conference today, including whether there's a connection between the accused and victim, if they're searching for any more suspects, or if other suspects hired the two young men.
The investigation is ongoing. Obviously, we're in the infancy of this investigation as it's only 13 days old. So there's many follow-up tasks to be completed.
Friends and family have told Global News they do not believe that this targeted attack has anything to do with the Air India case. Meanwhile, the two suspects were set to appear in provincial court today. Kamal Karamali, Global News in Surrey, British Columbia.
The cry heard across Canada. Ahead, the woman behind this heart-wrenching moment following the Pope's apology. Welcome back to the Plains of Abraham in Quebec City, this historic site that hosted the final public event of the day for Pope Francis. And as you can hear, a concert continues here this evening. On Monday, the pontiff delivered his first apology on Canadian soil to residential school survivors in Maskwacis, Alberta. But it was a moment that followed his words that has garnered global attention. As the program with Pope Francis drew to a close, a woman's voice could be heard singing over the crowd. It sounded like "O Canada," but there was a deeper message behind her performance. Heather Yurix West introduces us to the woman behind the emotional moment seen around the world.
A fist raised to the sky, a woman's voice carrying over the crowd in song. This was Maskwacis Monday, the first day of the papal tour. Moments earlier, Pope Francis had apologized for generations of cruelty and harm. But then, only that voice, its strength and undeniable emotion. To many, it sounded like "O Canada," the language, to those who know it, unmistakably Cree. Her eyes seemed to reveal so much pain, the final notes building to a deep cry. This wasn't part of the program. And then, still before the Pope, the woman shouts, her words carrying so much passion.
I turned my back, I said, "Hi, hi," and I shook it off. That's enough, because I wouldn't let it hurt me anymore.
Her name is Sepiko, and she says what she sang in Maskwacis wasn't the Canadian anthem at all.
No, that's not "O Canada," that's our village in the language of the Four Winds. After the song, I spoke the law to him, the law of these lands. Hereby serve the spoken law. We, the daughters of the Great Spirit, and our tribal sovereign members cannot be coerced into any law or treaty that is not the great law. We have appointed chiefs on our territories. Govern yourselves accordingly.
Her spontaneous moment of courage has been met with praise from both those who were there and the millions more who watched from afar. Sepiko says the pain she felt that day was shared and not hers alone. When she finished, she let that pain go.
Yeah, it felt powerful. Everybody that was hurting through these residential schools, everybody that shared their stories with me, that's who I shook my fringes to free them from all the pain. That's what I felt.
A deeply personal unburdening, still echoing across Canada and around the world. Heather Yurix West, Global News, Edmonton.
Inuktitut beats the internet. Next, the digital drive to protect an Indigenous language for future generations. The Pope will leave Quebec and head to Iqaluit on Friday, where he'll speak with some of Nunavut's residential school survivors, many of whom say they were beaten and abused just for speaking their own language. Today, there are more than 70 Indigenous languages spoken across Canada, though many of those are considered endangered by the UN. On a recent trip to Nunavut's capital, I met with a group of Inuit who are now working to protect their language in the age of social media. Summer in Iqaluit is in full swing. On this day, Nunavut's capital was hosting a celebration of Inuit culture, from food to music. But in a territory where Inuktitut is an official language, a lot of residents could also be heard speaking and singing in English. What language are you speaking most of the time?
Mostly English. I'm not fluent in Inuktitut.
Well, Inuktitut is spoken more than many Indigenous languages. The mother tongue of around 60% of Nunavut's population is in decline.
More and more children are speaking more English.
The group that represents Inuit in Nunavut says at this rate, by the year 2050, Inuktitut will only be spoken by 4% of households. She points to a new French language school being built with federal funds. Well, Inuktitut is only taught here up to grade 4.
We're treated so differently, as though our language is less important.
When we are not learning our own traditional language, our own Indigenous language, there's that feeling of missing something that's part of you.
So this Inuit-owned learning center is working to prevent their language from languishing by bringing Inuktitut into the digital age.
It was a little bit overwhelming.
This teacher took on the daunting task of translating Microsoft and Facebook apps into Inuktitut. The painstaking process began back in 2005, involving thousands of words. Some had to be shortened, others needed to be invented. Facebook comment, for example. There's even a new word for email.
Emails were sent so immediately by press of a button, so immediate means ingaynak. So the term knocked out was chosen.
The result, Inuktitut is now part of Microsoft's Translator app. So now when you speak into the microphone, the translation in Inuktitut appears in text. Sakuk Inuktitut. Sorry, it's my first lesson. The new Facebook interface was also unveiled this month.
We're all on Facebook, on regular basis. The more we put our language, Inuktitut language on internet, the more of a norm it will be in decades for future children.
A language the residential school system sought to destroy is not only surviving, but evolving for the next generation. And that is Global National for this Wednesday night. I'm Jeff Semple. We leave you now with more of Pope Francis's much-anticipated arrival here in Quebec City, his latest stop on the penitential pilgrimage through Canada. Thanks for watching. Hope to see you again tomorrow. Good night from Quebec City.